So far we've discussed the differences between stress, anxiety, and even things like excitement. We've talked about the human experience and how different particularly stresses, how they are processed by the brain in as quick as 1,000th of a second. I mean, that's groundbreaking because the body is so fine-tuned in terms of responding to threat. This 300 million year old system has developed and honed in on its advances up until this point. And yet here we are thrust in the 21st century where the only lions that are hiding behind the reeds are the ones that are often in our head or the ones that are behind a computer screen in social media, the workplace, and whatever you can consider, as stressful. And so today I'm going to talk about trauma and how traumatic experiences are processed by the brain and how they differ between anxiety and stress. So let's start off. What is trauma? The way that I define trauma is any event at all that comes back and causes stress long after the event has completed. Now, it's really interesting because so many different people have different definitions of stress and anxiety and trauma, especially trauma. Trauma in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is a very well-defined experience, and it can often miss experiences such as bullying and witnessing certain events that haven't happened to you but that have happened to somebody else, or it could be it misses events such as social media experiences where these events keep coming back, or things like medical anxieties and anticipatory anxieties where you're constantly on the lookout for something bad to happen and something that may have been traumatic in the past for you. So the DSM, although it can be a very important tool to diagnose mental illness, it is quite restrictive in terms of how it defines trauma. So let's consider trauma. Trauma is an inescapable event, something that's happened that you feel like you cannot escape from, and that can stay with you long after it has finished. Stress and anxiety, they can lead to trauma, but they are not traumas in themselves. Every single person sees a potentially traumatic event differently. So what may traumatize me may be different to what traumatizes you. You may be outside, cutting the grass, and you hear screeching of the tires and then a loud bang, and your body jumps to action. And for such a long time after that, your body's still in high gear, trying to figure out, hey, am I safe? Or you may have a car accident, a very minor car accident, where somebody hits you from behind. And for the longest time after that, you're constantly checking the rearview mirrors and you're not quite sure whether that's going to happen again. Or maybe even more distressing than that, and somebody may have hurt you or have hurt somebody else, and you witness that, and that stays with you. Trauma's different based on context. A race car driver who's in the middle of a race and the car flips over, they are trained to respond to these situations much differently than an average person whose car flips over. And so that affects the person differently. An MMA fighter, for example, being punched in the head multiple times, experiences that particular physical trauma to the body differently than you and I, who may be punched in the head, and that stays with us time and time again. So trauma is not necessarily the event, but it's the body's response to the event. And I think that's what we have to consider when we define, well, what's traumatic for ourselves. Because you have traumas that happen once and that continue to stay with us, and then you have traumas that happen over and over and over again, and that redefines the nervous system response. So much so that the sympathetic nervous system is in high gear all the time. One way to see whether that's happening for you is whether your body is constantly on high alert, looking around, anticipating danger. You're walking across the road, you're always on the lookout for something bad to happen. Or even in your head, you might always be reading into people's situations and considering, hey, is this person going to hurt me? Is this person going to be out to get me? There's a crossover between those traumatic events and anxiety, like social anxiety and these sorts of things, generalized anxieties. So to take a more nuanced approach, a more neurobiological approach, it's not necessarily trying to distinguish these different events or concepts. It's more about integrating them into what we know as a nervous system response. The stress, anxiety, excitement, trauma, they all work at the same neurobiological level and nervous system level as one another. So the question is, how does our body respond to these? And how is our nuanced approach to it? A deadline, a workplace altercation, or just disagreeing with somebody and our body going into that fight response or needing to get the hell out of there. How do we manage these particular responses? That's a really important distinguishing factor between trauma and stress and anxiety. So to summarize, trauma is an experience that stays with you long after it has gone. It has some parallels with anxiety and stress, but anxieties and stresses, they can lead to trauma, whereas traumatic events color the way that you see the world in the here and now, and you're constantly searching for danger. They can affect the way that we see the world at large, the way that we see other people, the way that we see ourselves. And these are alterations of the schemas that we have in the world. Schema being a large idea that we kind of hold against it, the glasses that we put on and see the world through. As we move forward in this course, we'll be considering, I think, what the most important bit is. Once you understand your response, how do you address it? How do you change it? How do you learn different types of strategies to move through these experiences? And that's what we're going to tackle next.